Okay, so we talked about the Mogollon culture, which eventually developed and combined with the ancestral Pueblo culture. We talked about the decline of that culture. Now let's talk about the Hohokam, who are located to the west of those cultures. So first off, let's talk about the population, the size of the population in the Southwest, because historically, historians believed that the Southwest was generally unpopulated, right? Not that many people there, and that culture hadn't really developed much in that area. But more recently, scholars are starting to recognize that the population of the Southwest was actually fairly robust, with about 220,000 people in the area before the contact of Europeans, okay, the Spanish. And so a fairly good sized population in the Southwest. But after contact with Europeans or with native peoples who had been in contact with Europeans, you start to see the spread of disease in the area of the Southwest, so that by the year 1764, things had changed dramatically. Populations were not as large as they used to be, and the ceremonial centers where people were congregated around began to fall into decay. Okay, so by 1764, you have about 32,000 people in the area, and so that's almost 200,000 people who were no longer there because of the effects of disease. Okay, so just to kind of give you an idea of the size of the population in the Southwest. Now, let's talk about the Hohokam culture located in the area of modern-day Arizona. So first off, some theories about the origins of the Hohokam people. Where do they come from? Who are they? So these are some of the questions. Well, let's talk about one theory by a scholar by the name of Emil W. Hari. Now, Hari basically had one of the leading theories on the origins of the Hohokam people and where they came from. And his theory was that they were originally migrants who came from Mesoamerica. Okay, so directly migrants who just migrated from Mesoamerica, came to the area of modern-day Arizona. They eventually absorbed local peoples, hunter-gatherer peoples who were already in the area, and from there they started to develop a culture that was heavily influenced by Mesoamerica, with various infusions of culture from Mesoamerica over the years as they started to develop in the region of the Southwest. Okay, so this is Hari's theory of who the Hohokam were. Okay, they came from Mesoamerica, they absorbed local people, they developed a culture that was heavily influenced by Mesoamerica because at periodic times, infusions of culture, right, probably through trade and other contact coming from Mesoamerica would affect and influence their culture there in the Southwest, right? So that's the old theory by Hari, but eventually that theory would change as more recent scholars begin to take another look at the origins of the Hohokam and who they were. Okay, so more recently, some of the theories are promoting the idea that the Hohokam actually developed their culture there locally in the Southwest, meaning that it was not migrants coming from Mesoamerica who started the culture of the Hohokam in the Southwest, that it was actually developed there in the Southwest locally by the peoples from that region. Okay, so that's a major difference. Okay, so the idea is that their agricultural way of life was developed by the people who already lived there in the Southwest, and that's the origins of the Hohokam culture. Okay, and so the idea is that by the year 700 CE, these people had already established a firm culture there in the Southwest. Okay, local people, not migrants from Mesoamerica. All right, so that's a totally new perspective on who the Hohokam were and their origin story. Now, this is not to say that there were not influences from Mesoamerica. There were influences, right? But it wasn't migrants who started the Hohokam culture. All right, so here is a list of several of the influences that we see amongst the Hohokam sites that show influences coming from Mesoamerica. Okay, so one, we see macaw feathers. Okay, macaw is, like a parrot. You could see here, this slide we're going to get to later, you have a macaw right here, right? So these feathers were most likely highly prized and used for ceremonial purposes amongst the Hohokam, all right? And so we see macaw feathers there amongst the Hohokam people, and those are coming from Mesoamerica. You don't have macaws in Arizona, naturally, okay? Other influences include pottery and the painting styles on the pottery. We see influences from Mesoamerica there, one of them being the cross of Quetzalcoatl, right? Or at least an image that looks very similar to the cross of Quetzalcoatl, which you would see on pottery in Mesoamerica, right? So there's some influences there in the pottery and the painting style. In art as well, you're going to see figurines at the Hohokam sites, which are promoting fertility themes. And we've talked about how in Mesoamerica, religion was related to the concept of fertility as people start to move to an agricultural way of life, right? Fertility becomes important because that's the center of life, the fertility of the earth, right? And so you start to see figurines in the area of the Hohokam in the Southwest that are also showing fertility themes in a similar way to what you would see in Mesoamerica. Other influences that you see amongst the Hohokam coming from Mesoamerica, you would see in their centers where they lived these large platform mounds, okay? And these mounds would be constructed in stages over time. So you would have like a small portion of the mound, then you build on top of it, and then again and again until it gets bigger and bigger, and eventually you have a large platform in the form of a mound. And on top of that mound would be ceremonies would be conducted, or rituals would be conducted there on these platform mounds. All right, that was the purpose of them, and that's very similar to the type of mounds that you would find amongst the various cultures in Mesoamerica. And then finally, the last influence coming from Mesoamerica would be ball courts. Yes, that's right. The ball game is actually going to be played by the Hohokam in the Southwest. You have about 200 ball courts being built by the Hohokam there in the Southwest, in the area of modern-day Arizona. Okay, around Tucson, Phoenix, around that area. Okay, so this is a lot of influences coming from Mesoamerica, so obviously there was contact. There's definitely trade going on for sure for hundreds of years going on between Mesoamerica and the Hohokam. And so there's contact, there's influences, there are cultural influences, and these are just some examples of those influences. Okay, another important aspect of the Hohokam is their irrigation networks. Talked a little bit about irrigation earlier, but now let's take a look at the Hohokam style of irrigation. These are vast irrigation networks. This is one of the things that the Hohokam are known for in history, are their irrigation networks. And so you have these vast irrigation networks. This is in the area around Scottsdale, right, around the Phoenix area in Arizona. And so you have these are based around the Salt River, and so you have these irrigation networks, these little lines coming off that are irrigating fields in those areas. Okay, you also have other irrigation networks here to the south. And so these are some examples of how they irrigated their crops. They were very elaborate and well built and maintained. And so this is the basis of their culture. This is how they grew their food. This is how they sustained their populations was through these irrigation networks there in a fairly dry place.